talking about energy in our ecosystems, and we'll be talking about energy pyramids, food chains, and food webs. Where does all our energy on Earth come from? The sun provides the electromagnetic energy plants need to make sugar through photosynthesis. Photosynthesis, photon, means light, and synthesis means to make. So this word means light making, and that's light making energy. This sugar energy can be obtained by consumers when we eat plants. So photosynthesis happens from producers. And then consumers that eat plants would be our second source. All energy essentially comes from the sun, though, because without producers, we wouldn't have consumers. So here's the equation for photosynthesis. You need carbon dioxide, which is a gas in our atmosphere, and water. And then in the presence of light, it will form this molecule, C6H12O6, which is a monosaccharide carbohydrate called glucose. And then it also produces oxygen. So plants breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen. We'll talk about this equation a lot more later in this unit. So today I would just write down the equation, but you won't be expected to know this on the first part of our test on this unit. Producers, they make their own food. They're also known as an autotroph. Auto means, automatic. You make something, you can make your own. So they make food through two different ways. The first way is called photosynthesis, like I mentioned, which we use energy from the sun. This is the most common type of producer. It's basically what we see all around us, all the plants that we have. Chemosynthesis, they use energy from inorganic compounds. So these are not very common. They actually, we would see maybe some bacteria that can actually use energy from inorganic compounds, and they might be found in some place like the very deep ocean where there's no light that's produced. And so this bacteria, there may be no light, but there may be lots of sulfur, which is an element, and the bacteria are able to take that sulfur and turn it into a usable form of energy. So the sulfur has potential energy, and they're able to convert that into a usable energy for the bacteria. But again, this is really rare. So biomass is just another term for potential energy, energy that is yet to be eaten. So biomass, we see there's lots of different forms of biomass, like anywhere from an animal, so we have eggs and milk, all the way to corn and corn stover. Here's some wood shavings. Lots of different types of items can be considered biomass. When we do our lab coming up, we'll talk mostly biomass when we can talk about cellulose, which is the component in the cell wall of plants that has to be broken down. But again, there's other types of biomass. Consumers, so consumers eat other organisms for food. They're also known as heterotrophs. So hetero, that means opposite. Trophic would be to eat. So these would be eating things that, they can't just make their own. So there's three types of heterotrophs. We have carnivores, herbivores, and omnivores. So carnivores just eat only other animals, so meat. Herbivores will eat just plant material, and omnivores will eat plants, animals, fungi, or algae. So humans are omnivores. Herbivores would be something like a rabbit. And a carnivore would be considered, something like a wolf. So as far as heterotrophs, we have our animals, which is the most common heterotrophs, and then there's some bacteria and some protists. There's a hierarchy. Hierarchy just means kind of levels or from top to bottom, uh, based on levels of consumption, and we call this an ecological pyramid. So I would draw this out, but I think this is a really good diagram to draw in your notes, and just showing that as energy decreases as you go up the pyramid. So we start with our sunlight, which is our source of energy that has the most energy, and they dole out energy to the producers, which dole out some energy when they're eaten by primary consumers. Those are the first level of consumers that eat just plant material, which dole out some of their energy when they get eaten by a secondary consumer, and then a tertiary consumer. So primary means 1, secondary 2, tertiary 3. So here's that pyramid again. And the biggest thing to understand here, what I also like about this, is they have this arrow here on this side. So I would add that to your drawing, which means the population goes from large all the way to small, which means there's a lot more producers than there are tertiary consumers. And the energy goes from high to low. So plants are a producer. They have more energy and there's a greater population of plants than maybe a secondary consumer of an eagle, which would have, every time they get their energy, they would get less amount of energy, and we just don't have as many eagles as we'd have producers. So know these words and where they go on the pyramid. So which ones are the autotrophs? Okay, the autotrophs would be the producers. What are the heterotrophs? Heterotrophs would be all the consumers. Know obviously what producer means. Know what primary consumer is, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. What is an herbivore? So these would be your primary consumers. Because they eat plant material. And then what would be your carnivore? Well, that would be your secondary and tertiary. The apex predator, that would be that top predator that really doesn't have any other predators. Apex mean kind of like the top, so that would be the one that's found up in this highest level that doesn't have something else that's eating that. Decomposers, so decomposers would be after any of these things die. So when anything on this pyramid dies, when they die, they need to be broken down. And so we have some types of bacteria, other kind of organisms that would break this down. That would be a decomposer. The 10% rule. Each time you go up a level on the pyramid, only 10% of the total energy is transferred. That means that 90% of the energy is lost. So what is it lost to? When we take a look at this primary producer here, like this flower, so the sun has, 1,000,000 joules of sunlight. The primary producer, the flower, only gets 10,000 joules. So where did the other, 90% go? Well, some of that energy gets kind of dissipates. Now we know energy cannot be created or destroyed, so it's not destroyed. It's not destroyed, but it kind of leaves the system. So this 90% of energy, it turns into unusable energy that can't be maintained within the actual system. So, think of this, mouse here, field mouse. It requires energy and to maintain its body temperature. It's a mammal, so it maintains a relative body temperature. So when it eats its food, some of that energy gets converted into heat. Well, that heat does not go back into the snake, right? That heat is out of the system, so that heat is joules that lost the system and does not get converted or transferred into the snake, okay? And there's other types of energy that could be, we have kinetic energy, there's other types of energy that kind of get lost in the system that don't get maintained in the system, and that's why we have that 10% rule. So food chains, they show a one-directional flow of energy from one trophic level to the other. It involves one organism at each trophic level. So again, the producer would be the grass. The primary consumer is a rabbit, which is a heterotroph, and it's also an herbivore. And then that rabbit gets eaten by the secondary consumer, the fox, which is also a heterotroph, and that is a carnivore. All the food chains for an entire community can be very, very complex. So meaning we kind of call it like these, they look kind of like spider webs where they go, all these different animals can get eaten by different animals, and so it can get really complex. The arrows show the direction of energy flow, not what each organism eats. Follow the arrow backwards to see what the organism actually eats. So when we look at this, the arrows show the direction of energy flow. So if I look at this small fish here, its energy goes to the seal. The fish doesn't eat the seal eats the fish, but the arrow shows the direction of energy flow. Likewise, this fish could also be eaten by this heron. The heron receives the energy from the small fish, not the other way around, so that's the direction of the arrow, and the heron eats the fish, not the fish eating the heron. And so this is just a very kind of, just a couple, simple food chain, but you can see already how the arrows kind of get all sorts of directions, and so it can get kind of complicated in just this little ecosystem. So imagine, if you look at the whole ecosystem or food web for the state of Wisconsin, it could get pretty complicated. And that's it for notes for today.